"You shouldn't swim alone," said the Mafia boss when her satin robe fell into his pool. The fluorescent lights of the Hotel Vista lobby hummed with a low, electric buzz that felt like it was vibrating directly against the back of Lila Hart's skull. It was 3 a.m. in San Aurelio. The coastal fog had rolled in off the Pacific, pressing against the glass doors and turning the city lights into smeared ghosts of amber and red. Lila adjusted her name tag, her fingers brushing the cheap plastic. She was 27 years old, and she felt every single year settling in the ache of her lower back. She had been standing for 8 hours, and she had another 2 to go before she could catch the early bus back to the cramped apartment she shared with her brother. She pulled her phone from the pocket of her blazer. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb fracture running from the top left corner down to the home button, but it still worked well enough to display the notifications that ruined her night: overdue rent, second notice for the electric bill, a text from the landlord asking if she had the rest of the deposit. Lila rubbed her temples. She was drowning. It was a slow, quiet drowning, the kind that happened to thousands of people in this city every day. San Aurelio was a place for the beautiful and the wealthy, for tech moguls who built glass houses on the cliffs and movie stars who hid behind high hedges. For people like Lila, it was a treadmill that moved just a little faster than she could run. She finished her shift in a haze of exhaustion. The bus ride home was a blur of gray streets and damp upholstery. When she finally unlocked the door to her apartment, the air inside felt stale. Tyler was not home yet. Lila dropped her bag on the kitchen counter and stared at the empty space where her brother should have been. He had promised to be back by midnight. He had promised a lot of things lately. She made herself a cup of instant coffee, her hands shaking slightly. As she reached for the sugar, she knocked over a stack of mail Tyler had left on the table. Papers slid across the cheap laminate surface. Among the junk mail and flyers, something small and pink fluttered to the floor. Lila picked it up. It was a betting slip, a horse race at the track down in the industrial district. The amount wagered was $400. $400. That was half the rent. The lock on the front door clicked. Lila stiffened, clutching the slip of paper. Tyler stumbled in, and he looked terrible. His hair was messy, his eyes wide and bloodshot, and there was a nervous, jittery energy radiating off him that made the small kitchen feel claustrophobic. He froze when he saw Lila standing there. "Hey, Lee," he said, his voice cracking. "You are up early." "Where were you?" Lila asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 1,000 disappointments. "Just out with some friends," Tyler said, looking everywhere but at her. "We lost track of time. You know how it is." Lila held up the pink slip. Tyler's face went pale. "That is old," he said quickly. "That is from weeks ago. It is dated yesterday." "Tyler," Lila said, "where did you get $400? Tyler ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small length of the kitchen. "I won it back, okay? I had a system. It was going to work. I just needed a little more time." Lila felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She stepped closer to him. "Who did you borrow from?" "It does not matter," Tyler snapped. "Defensive now. I can handle it." "Who?" Lila demanded. Tyler stopped pacing. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw genuine terror in his eyes. It was not the fear of a sister's scolding. It was the fear of a hunted animal. "Veras," he whispered. The name sucked the oxygen out of the room. Everyone in San Aurelio knew the name. The Veras family owned construction companies, shipping lines, and half the politicians in the city, but they also owned the shadows. They were the reason bodies sometimes washed up under the pier. Lila gripped the counter. "How much?" "Tyler." Tyler slumped against the refrigerator, sliding down until he was sitting on the linoleum floor. He put his head in his hands. 15,000. He choked out. Lila stared at him. She could work for a year, double shifts every single day, and never save $15,000. "I tried to fix it." Tyler sobbed into his hands. "I called Mikey. I asked for a loan. I told him the Veras guys were looking for me." Lila closed her eyes. He had said the name out loud on a phone line. He had panicked. "We are leaving," she said, her mind racing. "We will pack the car. We can go to Nevada." "They will find us," Tyler said, lifting his tear-streaked face. "They already know where I work. They know where we live." The next afternoon, the lobby of the Hotel Vista was bright with sunlight, but Lila felt cold. She stood behind the reception desk, checking in a couple from Ohio, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack the skin of her face. As the couple walked away toward the elevators, the automatic doors at the entrance slid open. Two men walked in. They did not look like tourists. They wore charcoal suits that fit too perfectly, the fabric expensive and dark. They moved with a synchronized confidence, stepping through the lobby as if they owned the floor tiles beneath their feet. Lila watched them approach the desk. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. One of the men, the taller of the two with silver hair at his temples, stopped directly in front of her. He placed his hands on the marble countertop. His fingernails were manicured. "Miss Hart," he said. His voice was pleasant, almost warm, which made it terrifying. "Yes," Lila managed to say. "We are here regarding a mutual acquaintance," the man said. "Your brother seems to have forgotten an appointment." Lila gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. "He is not here." "We know," the man said. "He's currently hiding in the supply closet of the restaurant where he washes dishes. We thought it would be more polite to speak to the head of the household first." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. "Please," she whispered. "He's just a kid. He made a mistake. Mistakes have costs," the man said. "Mr. Verace is a businessman. He expects his accounts to balance." He slid a card across the marble. It was heavy. Cream-colored stock with nothing but an address embossed in black ink. "You have 24 hours, the man said. "After that, the debt is collected in other ways." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. "He listens more than you would think," the man added. "If you go yourself." Then they were gone, leaving Lila standing in the brightly lit lobby with the card burning a hole in her vision. The address was in the high hills, the exclusive district that looked down on the rest of San Aurelio like Olympus looking down on mortals. Lila drove her 10-year-old sedan up the winding roads. The engine sputtered as it climbed, struggling against the incline. She passed gates that were taller than her car. She passed security cameras that swiveled to track her progress. The ocean spread out below to her left, a vast sheet of glittering blue. But Lila was too nauseous to appreciate the view. When she reached the address on the card, she had to speak into an intercom box. The heavy iron gates swung open silently. She drove up a long driveway lined with cypress trees, emerging into a circular courtyard in front of a mansion that looked more like a modern fortress. It was all clean lines, glass and stone, imposing and beautiful in a severe way. A security guard was waiting for her. He patted her down efficiently, took her purse, and led her through the front doors. The house was quiet. It smelled of cedar and lemon oil. The floors were polished concrete, cool and sleek. They walked down a long hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Lila would earn in a lifetime. The guard opened a set of double doors at the end of the hall and stepped aside. Lila walked in. The office was vast, with a wall of glass overlooking the ocean. The furniture was dark wood and leather. Behind a massive desk sat a man, Dante Verus. He did not look up immediately. He was reading a file, his head bowed. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a jawline that looked like it had been cut from granite. He was perfectly still. There was no fidgeting, no wasted movement. "Mr. Verace?" Lila asked. Her voice sounded thin in the large room. Dante closed the file. He looked up. His eyes were dark, intelligent and unnerving. He looked at her not with anger, but with a deep, penetrating focus, as if he were taking her apart and cataloging the pieces. "Miss Hart," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and controlled. "Please, sit." Lila sat on the edge of the leather chair opposite him. She clasped her hands in her lap to stop them from shaking. "I am here about Tyler," she said. "I assumed as much," Dante said, "since you are not here to deliver the $15,000. I do not have the money, Lila said, but I will get it. I work 2 jobs. I can pick up a third. I will pay you every cent, plus interest. I just need time. Please. Do not hurt him. Dante leaned back in his chair. He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was almost unbearable. You work at the Hotel Vista, night shift, he said. You also work weekends catering for a staffing agency. You average 4 hours of sleep a night. You have been paying your brother's debts for 3 years. 2 credit cards maxed out, no savings. Lila stared at him, her mouth opening slightly. I like to know who I am dealing with, Dante said calmly. You are drowning. Lila, you cannot take on a 3rd job. You will collapse. And then who looks after Tyler? Lila felt a flush of shame and anger rise up her neck. So what do you want me to do? Sell a kidney? Dante's mouth quirked at the corner. A faint, almost invisible smile. No, he said. I have no use for organs. I have use for order. He stood up and walked around the desk. He was tall, imposing, moving with a predator's grace. He leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms over his chest. My household is a machine, Dante said, but recently the gears have been grinding. My previous house manager retired. I need someone who is organized, discreet, and desperate enough to work the hours I require without complaint. Lila blinked. You want to hire me? I am proposing a trade. Dante corrected. You move in here. You manage the staff, the schedules, the deliveries. You ensure my life runs without friction. In exchange, I deduct $2,000 a month from your brother's debt. Lila did the math quickly. That would take months, 7, maybe 8 months of servitude, plus room and board. Dante added, which means the money you make from your hotel job, which you will keep, can actually go into a savings account for the first time in your life. It sounded too good to be true, which meant there was a trap. What is the catch? Lila asked. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. Total discretion, he said. What happens in this house stays in this house. You sign a non-disclosure agreement that is binding for life, and there are rules. Strict ones. Like what? You do not ask questions about my visitors, Dante said. You do not enter my private wing unless summoned, and you do not wander the grounds at night. Why? Lila asked. Because, Dante said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. This is not a normal home. There are security protocols. For your own safety. At night, you stay in your quarters. Lila looked at him. She saw the danger in him, the latent violence coil beneath the tailored shirt, but she also saw the lifeline he was throwing her. She thought of Tyler, shivering on the kitchen floor. I will take the deal, she said. 3 days later, Lila moved in. Her world shrank down to 2 suitcases. She was given a guest suite in the east wing of the mansion. It was larger than her entire apartment. The bed had sheets made of Egyptian cotton, and the bathroom had a tub deep enough to swim in. She met the rest of the household. There was Lena, the head housekeeper, a stern woman with a tight bun who looked at Lila with suspicion, but showed her how the linen closets were organized. There was Cal, the head of security, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk who communicated mostly in grunts and nods, and there was old Mr. Russo, the gardener, who spent his days tending the pristine rose bushes. He's a good boy, Russo told Lila on her second day, gesturing with his shears toward the office window where Dante was working. A good boy in a bad world. You remember that. Lila threw herself into the work. She organized the pantry, digitized the scheduling system for the cleaning staff, and fielded calls from tailors and restaurants. She saw Dante rarely. He was a ghost in his own house, leaving before dawn and returning late at night. When they did cross paths, he was polite but distant, treating her like a piece of furniture that had finally been placed in the correct spot, but the tension was always there. The house felt like a held breath. One night, a week after she had arrived, the silence became too much. It was 2 a.m. The air conditioning was humming softly, but Lila felt stifled. Her mind was racing with worries about Tyler, wondering if he was staying out of trouble now that the immediate threat was gone. She tossed and turned in the massive bed, tangling her legs in the expensive sheets. She needed air. She remembered Dante's rule. "Do not wander the grounds at night." But she looked out her window. The grounds were empty. The security lights cast a soft amber glow over the lawn, the pool. A long rectangle of turquoise water sat on the terrace overlooking the city lights. It looked peaceful, serene. Just for a minute, Lila told herself. She got out of bed. She did not have a proper robe, so she grabbed the one the staff had left in the wardrobe. It was black satin, thin and slippery against her skin. She tied the belt tight around her waist. She opened the French doors of her suite and stepped out onto the stone patio. The night air was cool and smelled of jasmine and salt water. She walked barefoot across the smooth stones toward the pool. The city of San Aurelio lay spread out below her, a carpet of diamonds glittering in the dark. It was beautiful from up here. Safe. Lila stood by the edge of the pool. The water was lit from within, glowing a soft, inviting blue. Steam rose gently from the surface. It was heated. She looked back at the house. The windows were dark. No one was awake. She just wanted to feel weightless for a moment, to wash away the stress of the last few years. Lila untied the satin belt. She let the robe slide off her shoulders. She was wearing a simple black one-piece swimsuit she had packed, thinking she might use the tub. It was modest, high cut at the thigh, but it clung to her curves like a second skin. She placed the robe on a lounge chair near the edge. She sat down on the coping, dipping her toes in. The water was perfect, warm, silky. She slid in without a splash. The water closed over her head, muting the hum of the city. She pushed off the wall, gliding underwater, feeling the tension drain from her muscles. She surfaced in the middle of the pool, treading water, looking out at the horizon where the black ocean met the black sky. For the first time in forever, she felt alone in a good way. She swam a few laps, the rhythm of her strokes soothing her mind. After 20 minutes, she decided she should go back before anyone noticed. She swam to the edge, near where she had left her robe. She pulled herself up, water cascading off her body. She reached out for the black satin bundle on the chair. Her wet fingers brushed the fabric. It was slippery. The robe slid. It tumbled off the chair and landed in the water with a soft plop. "No!" Lila gasped. She grabbed for it, but the satin instantly soaked up the water, becoming heavy and dark, sinking below the surface. She stood there on the pool deck, dripping wet, exposed to the cool night air. The wind raised goosebumps on her arms. She hugged herself, shivering, suddenly feeling very small and very naked despite the swimsuit. A sound came from the terrace, the slide of a glass door opening. Lila spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Dante was standing there. He was in the shadows of the overhang, but the pool lights reflected in his eyes. He was wearing dark trousers and a white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand. He was not looking at the city view. He was looking at her. His gaze traveled slowly from her wet hair, down the curve of her neck, over the clinging black swimsuit, to her bare feet on the stones. It was not a lecherous look. It was heavy, intense. It felt like he was physically touching her from 20 feet away. The silence stretched, thick and charged with electricity. Lila could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She wanted to cover herself, to jump back into the water, to run, but she was frozen by the weight of his attention. Dante took a step forward, stepping out of the shadows and into the amber light. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. His voice was low, a rough velvet sound that cut through the quiet night. "You shouldn't swim alone," he said. Lila froze in the water, her limbs locking up as the deep baritone of Dante's voice reverberated against the quiet of the night. The water, which had felt so warm and welcoming moments ago, now felt like a trap. She stood chest-deep in the turquoise glow, her arms instinctively crossing over her chest in a futile attempt to shield herself. Though the black swimsuit covered her adequately, it was the vulnerability of the moment, the stripping away of her professional armor, that made her skin burn. Dante stepped closer to the pool's edge. The amber security lights cast long, sharp shadows across the stone terrace, but his face was illuminated by the underwater lamps reflecting upward. He looked titanic from her angle. a dark silhouette against the night sky, holding a tumbler of amber liquid that caught the light. "I did not mean to disturb you," Lila stammered, her voice sounding thin and watery to her own ears. "I could not sleep." Dante did not reply immediately. He set his glass down on a wrought iron table with a deliberate click. He reached toward a stack of folded towels tucked into a sheltered alcove of the pool house, grabbing a large, plush white sheet. He walked to the very edge of the coping, his polished shoes inches from the water, and extended the towel toward her. "Come out, Lila," he said. "The wind is picking up." Lila hesitated, then waded toward him. The water offered a strange sense of protection, and leaving it meant stepping into his space, into his line of sight. She placed her hands on the cool stone edge and hoisted herself up. Water cascaded off her body, splashing onto the deck. As she stood, the night air hit her wet skin, raising goosebumps along her arms and thighs. She took the towel from his hand, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the chill seizing her. She wrapped the thick cotton around herself instantly, pulling it tight like a cocoon, burying her chin in the fabric. Dante watched her. His gaze was not leering, but it was heavy. It traced the path of a wayward drop of water sliding from her wet hair, down the curve of her neck, settling in the hollow of her throat before disappearing into the towel. It was a look of assessment, of ownership, as if he were checking for cracks in a valuable vase. "You disregarded the security protocols," he said. His tone was mild, but there was a steel thread running through it. "I stayed within the walls." Lila defended, clutching the towel tighter. "I thought the rule was about leaving the property." "The rule is about exposure," Dante corrected. He gestured vaguely toward the hills surrounding them. "Dark shapes against the stars. We have walls, yes, but lines of sight exist. There are hills. There are long-range lenses. You standing out here, lit up like a beacon in my pool. It invites attention." Lila felt the flush rise to her cheeks, heating her face despite the cold. "I did not think anyone would be watching." "People are always watching," Dante said, his voice dropping lower. "And I do not like the idea of you being vulnerable. Not here, not in my yard." The possessiveness in his voice was unmistakable. It was not the concern of an employer for an employee. It was the territorial instinct of a predator guarding its den. Lila looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. For a second, the air between them felt thick, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with the man standing 2 feet away from her. Then Dante stepped back, breaking the invisible tether. "Go inside," he said, picking up his drink. "Dry off. We have a long day tomorrow." The next morning, the atmosphere in the house shifted from the intimate danger of the poolside to the crisp, high-pressure efficiency of business. Lila was up at 5, her hair dried and pulled back into a severe ponytail, determined to prove she was not the shivering girl from the night before. Dante moved through the world like a shark cutting through water, silent, lethal, and constantly in motion. Lila found herself running to keep up, both metaphorically and literally. Her first task was managing a delivery of custom suits from a tailor who arrived in a nondescript van. The suits were works of art, fabrics so dark and rich they seemed to absorb the light. Lila cataloged them, checking the stitching, ensuring every button was secure. She noticed Dante watching her from the doorway of his study as she berated the tailor for a loose thread on a charcoal jacket. He said nothing, but he gave a single, approving nod before turning back to his phone. By noon, they were in the back of his armored sedan, heading toward the city center. Dante had a meeting at a restaurant that did not have a sign out front, only a heavy oak door and a valet who knew Dante by name. Lila sat beside him in the car, clutching a tablet with his schedule. She felt the hum of the engine and the heavy, bulletproof glass separating them from the noisy streets of San Aurelio. Inside the restaurant, the air smelled of truffle oil and old money. The meeting was with a union representative, a sweaty man who looked terrified. Lila sat at a small table nearby, pretending to check emails while actually monitoring the room as Cal had instructed her. She watched Dante work, He was calm, his voice never rising above a conversational level. Yet the union rep was shaking by the time the espresso arrived. Dante was dismantling the man's arguments with surgical precision, leaving him no room to maneuver. But it was what happened afterward that stuck with her. As they left, Dante stopped to speak to the young waiter who had been refilling their water. He asked about the man's law school classes. Apparently, he remembered a conversation from months ago. He slipped a roll of cash into the waiter's hand, an amount that Lila estimated was close to $500. "Put it toward the books," Dante said quietly. "And tell your mother I said hello." The waiter looked at Dante with something approaching worship. "Thank you. Mr. Verace. Thank you." Lila watched the exchange, confused. She had seen the enforcers threaten her brother. She had seen the fear Dante inspired, but here he was, funding a student's education with a casual generosity that seemed entirely genuine. The moral code of this man was a labyrinth she could not navigate. Back at the mansion, the afternoon slowed down. They sat at the long marble counter in the kitchen. The sun was streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in white light. It felt domestic, deceptively normal. Dante was reviewing contracts, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose, a touch of humanity that made him look less like a mob boss and more like an architect. Lila was organizing receipts, but her mind was drifting. She had grabbed a pen and was absently sketching on a paper napkin. Dante looked up, catching her in the act. "What is that?" he asked. Lila jumped, her hand covering the napkin. "Nothing. Just doodling. Show me," he said. It was not a command, but it was close. Lila slid the napkin across the cool marble. It was a sketch of a gown, an intricate design with a high neck and a plunging back, draped in a way that suggested heavy silk. The lines were confident, the shading precise even in ballpoint pen. Dante picked it up, studying it with the same intensity he used on his contracts. "This is good," he said, looking at her. "You have training." "I wanted to go to design school," Lila admitted, her voice quiet. "I was accepted to a program in New York when I was 19. What happened?" Lila shrugged, a gesture that carried the weight of years. "Tyler happened. Mom got sick, and then she passed. And Tyler, he did not handle it well. The money for tuition went to rent, then it went to rehab, then it went to debts." She looked down at her hands. The dream just sort of evaporated. Dante placed the napkin back on the counter, smoothing out a crease with his thumb. "Talent does not evaporate." "Lila," he said softly, "opportunities do, but the talent remains." She looked up and saw a faint, surprised smile on his face. It was a small expression, barely there, but it transformed his features, softening the hard planes of his face. For a moment, he looked impressed. The moment was shattered by the ring of his phone. Dante checked the screen, and the smile vanished instantly. The ice returned to his eyes. He stood up, walking toward the far end of the kitchen, answering with a sharp, "Yes." Lila tried not to listen, but his voice carried in the acoustic perfection of the room. "I was told the shipment was secure," Dante snapped. His voice was cold, lethal. "The Rossies are getting bold. If they knew the route, it means we have a leak." Lila froze. "A leak. Find it," Dante ordered. "Turn the organization upside down if you have to. But find out who is talking to the Rossies, and do not let this get back to my father." He hung up, gripping the phone so tightly Lila thought the screen might crack. He stood there for a moment, staring out at the ocean, his back rigid. Lila saw the tension in his shoulders, the burden of a violent empire resting on him. He was wealthy, powerful, and respected, but he was also besieged. The golden cage was under attack. That evening, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the mansion, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and black. Lila was in the hallway, carrying a stack of towels to the linen closet, when the world went black. The power cut out instantly. The hum of the refrigerator, the air conditioning, the ambient lights, everything died, plunging the house into absolute, suffocating darkness. Lila gasped, stopping in her tracks. She waited for the backup generators, but nothing happened. Silence reigned, save for the drumming of rain on the roof. "Hello?" she called out. A moment later, emergency lights flickered to life along the baseboards, faint, ghostly strips of white LED that offered barely enough illumination to see the floor. She pulled out her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom. She turned the corner toward the kitchen and nearly collided with a solid wall of muscle. "Whoa!" a voice said. Lila shrieked, dropping the towels. Two strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her. "Easy," Dante said. "It is just me." Lila breathed out, her heart hammering. "The generators? They are cycling," he said, his voice sounding loud in the quiet house. "Give them a minute. Cal is checking the breakers." They stood there in the hallway, illuminated only by the twin beams of their phone flashlights. The shadows stretched long and distorted around them. "Are you hungry?" Dante asked. A surprising normalcy in the chaos. I suppose," Lila said. They made their way to the kitchen. With the electric stoves useless, they settled for a makeshift meal. Dante found a loaf of crusty bread, some cured meats, and a jar of olives. He lit 3 large candles he found in a drawer, placing them on the kitchen island. The flickering flame cast a warm, golden glow over the marble, softening the harsh modern lines of the kitchen. It felt intimate, secret. They sat on stools across from each other, tearing pieces of bread. The storm raged outside, but in the circle of candlelight, it was quiet. Dante poured 2 glasses of red wine. He pushed one toward her. "To surviving the dark," he said. Lila took a sip. The wine was rich and complex. "So, is this a regular occurrence? Power outages in a multi-million-dollar fortress?" "The grid in San Aurelio is old," Dante said, "and the storm is heavy. Even fortresses have weaknesses." He looked at her over the rim of his glass. The candlelight danced in his eyes, making them look almost molten. "How is your brother holding up?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. Lila set her glass down. "He is trying. He swears he is clean. He's working double shifts at the diner." "But," Dante prompted. "But I am waiting for the other shoe to drop," Lila admitted. Her voice broke slightly. It always does. "I pay a debt. He accrues another. I fix a mess. He makes a bigger one." She looked at the candle flame, her exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. "I am 27, Dante, and I feel like I have been a mother for 10 years. I am so tired of being the responsible one. I am tired of being the only thing standing between him and ruin." She'd never said that out loud to anyone. Not even her friends. It felt like a betrayal, but it also felt like setting down a heavy pack after a long hike. Dante listened intently. He did not offer platitudes. He did not tell her it would get better. He just watched her with an expression that was unexpectedly gentle. "Loyalty is a heavy coat," he said quietly. "It keeps you warm, but it weighs you down. I know the feeling of carrying people who cannot walk on their own." Lila looked at him. She realized he was talking about his father, about the staff, about the hundreds of families that relied on the Vorace payroll. They were both caretakers, in vastly different worlds. A sudden, thunderous crack of lightning struck somewhere close to the house. The boom shook the floorboards. Lila jumped, letting out a small cry. Dante laughed softly. It was a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in her chest. He rose from his stool and walked around the island. He stepped into her personal space, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out, his hand lightly touching her elbow. It was a reassuring gesture, meant to steady her, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with the storm. "It is just noise." "Lila," he murmured, "the house will hold." Lila looked up at him. In the dim light, the hard lines of his face were blurred. He looked human, approachable, desirable. She did not pull away. She found herself leaning imperceptibly toward him, her breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythm of the rain. Dante did not move his hand. His thumb brushed the fabric of her sleeve, a slow, hypnotic motion. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The air between them grew heavy, pressurized. It was the same feeling as the pool, but stronger. The pull of gravity. Dante tilted his head slightly. His eyes darkened. Lila's lips parted. a silent invitation. She wanted him to bridge the gap. She wanted to know what it felt like to be held by the man who held the city. He leaned in. She could smell him, sandalwood, rain, and the faint metallic scent of ozone, just as their breath mingled, just as the distance closed to nothing. The kitchen door burst open. "Boss!" Lila jerked back as if she had been burned, nearly knocking over her wine glass. Dante straightened instantly, his body shifting from lover to soldier in a microsecond. Cal stood in the doorway, a heavy flashlight in his hand, oblivious to the scene he had just shattered. "Backup generators are kicking in now," Cal reported breathlessly. "A tree took out the main line down the road. But we are operational." Dante cleared his throat. He did not look at Lila. His jaw was tight, a muscle feathering near his ear. "Thank you." "Cal," Dante said. His voice was clipped, devoid of the warmth that had been there seconds ago. "Get the perimeter lights back on first. On it." Cal disappeared back into the hallway. The moment was dead. The tension remained. But now, it was awkward. Sharp with embarrassment. Lila stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I should go check on the linens. Make sure nothing got wet." She did not wait for a response. She turned and hurried out of the kitchen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. As she retreated down the dark corridor, the flicker of the candles caught the deep, crimson blush staining her neck. Dante stood alone in the kitchen. He watched her go, his hands gripping the edge of the marble counter until his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly into the silence, fighting the urge to call her back. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of high-stakes efficiency. Lila Hart had expected her life in the Verace mansion to be one of silent servitude, scrubbing floors while men with guns whispered in the hallways. Instead, she found herself becoming the central nervous system of the house. She streamlined Dante's calendar, color-coding meetings that ranged from legitimate construction bids to vague, late-night sit-downs at warehouses and the dockyards. She managed the household staff with a firm but kind hand, earning a grudging respect from Lena, the housekeeper, and a warm smile from the security team, who appreciated that the coffee machine was now always stocked with the good beans. But it was on a Tuesday afternoon that Lila saw a side of Dante Veras that didn't fit the dossier of a ruthless crime lord. She had arranged a private physical therapy session for Dante's father, Alessandro, at an exclusive rehabilitation center on the outskirts of San Aurelio. Alessandro was a shadow of the man who had built the empire, confined to a wheelchair by a stroke that had stolen his speech and the use of his left side. Lila watched from the doorway of the therapy room. Dante was not pacing or checking his phone. He was standing beside the parallel bars, his suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up. "Come on." "Pop," Dante said. His voice was unrecognizable, soft, patient, devoid of the steel edge he used with everyone else. "One more step. You can do it." Alessandro's face contorted with effort, his knuckles white as he gripped the bars. He dragged his left leg forward, trembling. He looked ready to collapse. Dante was there instantly, his hands hovering around his father's waist, ready to catch him but letting the old man fight his own battle. When Alessandro finally planted his foot, Dante smiled. It was a genuine, boyish expression that made Lila's breath catch in her throat. "That is it," Dante said, gently wiping sweat from his father's forehead with a towel. "You are strong as an ox. Old man. Stronger than me." Lila turned away, feeling like an intruder on a sacred moment. She realized then that Dante's violence, his empire, and his coldness were not just for power. They were a wall built to protect the few things he loved that were too broken to protect themselves. The fragility of that peace was shattered at 3 a.m. Lila was asleep in her suite, the high thread count sheets tangled around her legs. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, it was a jarring, angry sound in the silence of the mansion. She fumbled for it, eyes bleary. The screen said, "Tyler." "Hello?" she whispered, sitting up, her heart instantly hammering. "Lee?" Tyler's voice was a panicked wheeze. "Lee, are you there?" "I'm here," she said, clutching the phone. "Ty, "What is wrong? It is 3 in the morning. Someone followed me," Tyler said. He sounded like he was crying. "I was leaving the diner, a gray sedan. It sat across the street for 2 hours. And when I drove home, it stayed 2 cars behind me the whole way." Lila felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Tyler hissed. "I took 3 right turns. They stayed with me. Lee, I am scared. Is it Verace? Did he send them to remind me to pay?" "No," Lila said firmly, though she wasn't entirely certain. "No. Tyler, the deal is solid. As long as I am here, you are safe from him." "Then who is it?" Tyler asked. "I do not know," Lila said. "Go inside. Lock the doors. Stay away from the windows. I will find out." She hung up and stared at the ceiling. The plaster was intricately molded, beautiful and expensive. She was lying in a palace, safe behind gates and guards, while her brother was cowering in their rot-infested apartment. The reality of her situation settled over her like a lead blanket. She and Tyler were no longer just on the periphery of Dante's world. They were tangled in its roots, and the rot was spreading. 2 days later, the outside world came knocking at the gate. It was a bright, crisp morning. Lila was in the foyer, arranging a vase of white lilies on the center table. When Cal buzzed the intercom, "Federal agent at the gate," Cal's voice crackled, "says it is a welfare check for Alessandro Verras." Lila frowned. "A welfare check? Send him up." Dante's voice cut in over the system. "We have nothing to hide." Minutes later, a black government vehicle pulled up. The man who stepped out was sharp. Agent Monroe wore a suit that was cheaper than Dante's, but worn with the arrogance of authority. He had eyes that looked like they had seen everything and found it all disappointing. Lila met him at the door. "Mr. Verace is currently unavailable," she said, using her best receptionist voice. "But his father is resting in the sunroom if you need to see him." Monroe smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Miss Hart, I was hoping to speak to you." Lila stiffened. "To me?" Monroe stepped into the foyer, looking around at the opulence with a sneer of distaste. "We know who you are, Lila. We know about your brother's gambling. We know you moved in here 2 weeks ago." Lila said nothing. She clasped her hands in front of her, mimicking Dante's stillness. "It is a dangerous place for a nice girl," Monroe said, lowering his voice. "Dante Verras is not a hotel manager. He is a shark, and sharks eventually eat everyone swimming in their tank. I am just an employee." "Agent Monroe," Lila said, "I manage the house." Monroe took a step closer, invading her personal space. "If you ever feel unsafe, if you ever see something that scares you, we can help. We can make you disappear. New name, new town. We can help your brother, too." The offer hung in the air. A temptation and a threat rolled into one. Before Lila could answer, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Is there a problem? Agent Monroe?" Dante stood at the top of the grand staircase. He was dressed in black, looking like the Grim Reaper come to collect a soul. He descended the stairs slowly, his eyes fixed on the agent. "Just checking on the citizens," Verace, Monroe said, stepping back from Lila. "Making sure everyone is here of their own free will." "Everyone here is free," Dante said, reaching the bottom step. "Now, unless you have a warrant, get off my property." Monroe held Dante's gaze for a long moment, a silent clash of wills. Then he tipped his head to Lila. "Here is my card. Miss Hart, just in case." He placed a card on the table beside the lilies and walked out. As soon as the door clicked shut, Dante turned on her. The gentleness she had seen at the rehab center was gone. He looked dangerous. "What did you say to him?" he demanded. "Nothing," Lila said, backing away slightly. "He just asked if I was safe." "Did you tell him about the Rossies?" Dante asked, stepping closer. "Did you tell him about the shipment trouble?" "No," Lila exclaimed. "I told you. I signed a contract. I keep my word." Dante studied her face, searching for a lie. He looked at her fear, her indignation, and finally, her honesty. Slowly, the tension left his shoulders. He believed her. Reluctantly, but he believed her. "Good," he said, his voice rough. "Because we have to put on a show. A show. The Firemen's Charity Gala is tonight," Dante said. "The Rossies will be there. The mayor will be there, and I need to show them that my house is in order, that I am not rattled." He looked her up and down, his gaze critical and possessive. "You are coming with me." "Me?" Lila laughed nervously. "I am the housekeeper. Dante, I do not belong at a gala. Tonight, you are not the housekeeper," Dante said. "Tonight, you are my date." The dress arrived 3 hours later. It was a midnight blue satin gown, commissioned by Dante from a designer downtown. When Lila put it on, she felt like a different person. The fabric draped over her frame like liquid, hugging her waist and cascading to the floor in a shimmer of dark light. It was modest in the front, but dipped low in the back, exposing her spine. She walked down the stairs, feeling self-conscious, terrified she would trip. Dante was waiting in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up. His hands stopped moving. He stared at her for a long silence, his eyes darkening. He did not say she looked beautiful. He did not offer a compliment. He simply walked over to her, took her hand, and placed it on his arm. "Do not leave my side," he said. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the City Opera House. It was a sea of tuxedos, jewels, and fake smiles. Lila felt the weight of 100 eyes on her as they entered. She recognized politicians she had seen on the news. Shaking hands with men she knew from Dante's files were criminals. It was a masquerade where everyone showed their real faces, but pretended they were masks. Dante navigated the room like a king. People parted for him. Men shook his hand with too much enthusiasm. Women looked at him with hungry eyes. But Dante's focus never wavered. He kept Lila tucked against his side, his arm a steel band around her waist. Every time a man's gaze lingered too long on the curve of her hip or the skin of her back, Dante's grip tightened. It wasn't painful, but it was a signal. Mine. His thumb brushed calming, possessive circles against the satin of her dress at her hip, grounding her in the chaos. "Relax," he murmured in her ear as they accepted champagne from a passing tray. "They are just sharks in fancy suits." Lila looked up at him. "And what are you?" "I am the orca," he said with a dry smirk. "Sharks are afraid of orcas." After an hour of polite conversation and veiled threats, Dante steered her toward the terrace doors. They stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the city harbor. The noise of the party faded behind the glass, replaced by the sound of distant foghorns and the wind. Dante walked to the stone railing and leaned on it, staring out at the dark water. He looked tired. The armor he wore so perfectly inside seemed to crack just a little in the fresh air. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly. Lila joined him at the railing. "Regret what?" "The deal," Dante said. "Walking into this life, you could be sleeping in your own bed right now, worrying about the electric bill instead of worrying about federal agents and rival families." Lila looked out at the city lights. She thought of Tyler. Safe for now. She thought of the way the staff looked at her with respect. She thought of the way Dante had looked at her by the pool. "I regret that it was necessary," she admitted honestly. "I regret that Tyler put us in this position." She turned to look at him. "But I do not regret being here. It is strange. But I feel more useful here than I ever did at the hotel. I feel like I'm actually doing something." Dante turned his head, meeting her gaze. The honesty between them glowed in the warm night air, stripping away the employer-employee barrier. "You are dangerous." "Lila Hart," he said softy. "Why? Because you make me want to be someone who deserves that loyalty." The air between them shifted. It became heavy, magnetic. The crowd inside, the danger outside, it all fell away. There was only the balcony, the moonlight, and the man standing inches from her. Dante reached out. His hand cupped her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. His skin was warm and rough against the smooth satin of her mood. His fingers slid into the hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head back gently. Lila's breath hitched. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath his tuxedo shirt. She could feel his heart beating, a heavy, rhythmic thud that matched the pounding in her own ears. He lowered his head slowly, giving her 1,000 chances to pull away. She did not move. She rose onto her toes to meet him. Their lips met. It was not a frantic kiss. It was slow, deliberate and devastating. It tasted of champagne and danger. Dante kissed her as if he were memorizing the shape of her mouth. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flesh against him, crushing the satin of her gown between their bodies. Lila gasped softly against his lips, and Dante took the opening to deepen the kiss. It became hungrier, more desperate. His hand tightened in her hair. Lila's fingers curled into the lapels of his jacket, anchoring herself as the world spun. It felt like falling off a cliff and realizing she had wings. The sound of footsteps clicking on the stone terrace shattered the moment. "Mr. Verace?" a voice called out from the shadows. They broke apart, breathing hard. Dante positioned his body in front of hers instantly, shielding her from view as he turned to face the intruder. It was just a donor, looking for a light, but the spell was broken. "We are leaving," Dante said, his voice rough and uneven. The ride back to the mansion was silent, but the car crackled with electricity. Every time the vehicle turned a corner and their legs brushed against each other, Lila felt a jolt that went straight to her core. When they arrived, the house was quiet. The staff had retired for the night. Lila walked into the kitchen, needing to do something with her hands. Her nerves were frayed wires. She kicked off her heels, standing on the cold marble in her bare feet. "I am going to make coffee," she announced. "Do you want some?" Dante leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, looking disheveled in a way that made her knees weak. "Coffee at midnight?" he asked. "I am too wired to sleep," Lila said, reaching for the canister of beans. "And besides, if I leave it to you, we will be drinking sludge in the morning." Dante chuckled, a low sound. He pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her. "My coffee is not that bad. It is a crime against humanity," Lila teased, her back to him as she fiddled with the grinder. "You burn the beans every time." She froze as she felt him step up behind her. He was close, too close. She could feel the heat of his body radiating against her back. "Show me, then," he murmured. His voice was right at her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. He reached around her, his arms caged her against the counter, his hands covering hers on the coffee grinder. He did not pull back. He stood there, his chest pressed lightly against her shoulder blades, his chin hovering near her temple. Lila stopped breathing. The simple act of preparing the machine became incredibly intimate. His large hands guided hers, his fingers interlocked with hers to press the button. "Like this?" he whispered. "Yes." Lila breathed. They stood there for a long moment as the machine whirred. They were not moving. They were just existing in the same space, pressed together, the boundaries between them dissolving. Lila felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to lean back against him, to turn around in the circle of his arms and finish what they had started on the balcony. The desire was a physical ache. It terrified her. She pulled away. She ducked under his arm, stepping sideways, putting 5 feet of safe, marble floor between them. Her hands were shaking. I forgot to check the schedule for tomorrow," she stammered, unable to look him in the eye. "I should go do that." Dante stood by the counter, his hands empty. He looked at her, his eyes dark with unspoken things. He did not try to stop her. He knew, just as she did, that if they stayed in this kitchen for 1 more minute, there would be no going back. "Good night, Lila," he said softly. "Good night," she whispered. She turned and fled the kitchen, leaving him alone with the smell of freshly ground coffee and the ghost of her perfume in the air. The silence in the Verace mansion had changed. It was no longer the peaceful hush of a well-ordered sanctuary. It was the heavy, static-charged silence of a held breath before a lightning strike. For 3 days, the atmosphere was suffocating. Lila Hart moved through the hallways carrying trays of espresso and stacks of files, catching whispered fragments of conversation between the security staff. She heard words like incendiary, frozen assets, and retaliation, the Rossi family, a rival syndicate that had been circling the Verace territory like sharks sensing blood, had stopped circling and started biting. Lila saw the toll it took on Dante. He was a man constructed of iron control, but the metal was beginning to heat up. She was in his office, organizing the invoices for a construction project that had been suspiciously halted by a fire inspection. When Dante slammed his phone down onto the mahogany desk, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Lila flinched, dropping a pen. Dante stood by the window, his back to her. His hands were braced against the sill, gripping the wood so hard his knuckles were white. His shoulders rose and fell in a slow, deep rhythm as he fought to leash the violence inside him. "Damn them," he said. His voice was a low growl. "They burned 2 delivery trucks in the garment district this morning. Drivers are in the hospital." Lila walked over to him slowly. She did not touch him. He looked like he might shatter or explode if she did, but she stood close enough that he could sense her presence. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked quietly. Dante turned. His eyes were dark, swirling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. When his gaze landed on her, the anger receded just enough to reveal the fear underneath. "Just stay inside," he said. "Stay where I can see you. I cannot fight a war on 2 fronts. Lila, I need to know the home front is secure. I am not going anywhere." Lila promised. But even as she said it, she saw his eyes drift to the gate on the monitor screens. His attention fractured. He was a king trying to hold his walls while the foundation crumbled. Across the city, in a booth at a greasy diner that smelled of stale coffee and regret, Tyler Hart was making a mistake that would cost everything. He sat opposite a man named Vinny, a mid-level associate for the Rossi family who wore a suit that was too shiny and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tyler was shaking. He had not slept in 2 days. The pressure of his debts, even with Dante's help, felt like a physical weight crushing his chest. He convinced himself that Dante Varese was the villain, the monster holding his sister hostage in a castle on a hill. "We just want to help you, kid," Vinny said, sliding a thick envelope across the sticky table. "We know you are in a bad spot. Varese. He uses people. He's using your sister right now." Tyler stared at the envelope. He knew there was cash inside, enough to clear his bookie debt, enough to buy a bus ticket to anywhere. "I want her out," Tyler whispered. "I want her away from him." "We can do that." Vinny nodded sympathetically. "We just need to know his schedule. We need to know where the weak points are. If you help us, we take Varese down and your sister walks free. Her slate is wiped clean. Your slate is wiped clean." Tyler looked at the man. He was terrified, but in his warped, desperate logic, he saw a way to be the hero. He saw a way to save Lila from the mob boss he had forced her to serve. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "She goes to the market on Tuesdays," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. "She likes to pick out the produce herself. She usually takes the sedan, not the armored SUV." Vinny smiled, and it was the look of a wolf that had just been invited into the sheep pen. "You are a good brother, Tyler." The following Tuesday was overcast, the sky a bruised purple that promised rain. Lila sat in the back of the black sedan, scrolling through her phone. She had insisted on running the errand to the upscale grocer in the city center. The mansion felt like a prison, and she needed 20 minutes of normalcy. She needed to squeeze avocados and smell fresh basil. Her driver, a young man named Marco, was humming along to the radio. "We will be quick." "Miss Hart," Marco said as he turned into the concrete parking structure of the market. In and out. Lila smiled at his reflection in the rear-view mirror. "Do not worry. Marco, I just need some ingredients for Mr. Varese's dinner. The chef is sick, and I thought I would try to cook something decent for once." Marco laughed. "Just do not burn the kitchen down." He turned the car onto the 3rd level of the structure. It was quiet. Too quiet. Suddenly, a heavy white van screeched out from a parking spot, blocking the lane diagonally. Marco slammed on the brakes. The sedan skidded to a halt, tires squealing against the concrete. "What the—" Marco began. Before he could reverse, a second vehicle slammed into the rear bumper of the sedan, pinning them in. Doors flew open. Men in ski masks poured out of the van. They moved with terrifying speed. "Lock the doors," Marco shouted, reaching for his weapon, but it was too late. The side window shattered in a spray of safety glass as a baton smashed through it. Lila screamed, throwing her arms up to shield her face. Rough hands grabbed her. The door was wrenched open. Lila kicked and clawed, landing a blow on a masked face, but she was hauled out of the car by sheer brute force. "Let her go!" Marco yelled, firing a shot that went wild as he was pistol-whipped into silence. Lila was dragged across the concrete. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the ground hard, the screen shattering into 1,000 spiderweb fractures. She screamed Dante's name, a desperate, instinctive plea, before a hood was shoved over her head and she was thrown into the back of the van. The sliding door slammed shut, sealing her in darkness. Dante was in a meeting with his capos when the call came. He looked at the screen. It was Marco. He answered on the first ring. "Report." There was silence on the line for a second, then a ragged, wet coughing sound. "Boss," Marco wheezed. "They took her." The world stopped. The air left the room. The captains around the table, hardened men who had seen war, flinched at the look that crossed Dante Verace's face. It was not anger. It was an annihilation event. "Where?" Dante asked. His voice was so quiet it was terrifying. "Parking structure, West Side Market. It was the Rossies. I saw the tattoo on the wrist of the guy who hit me." Dante stood up. He walked out of the room without looking back at his men. "Get the car," he said to Cal, who was already moving, "and get the heavy equipment." 5 minutes later, Dante was behind the wheel of his personal interceptor, a car built for speed and violence. Rain had begun to fall, lashing against the windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of blood red and neon blue. Dante drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the passenger seat, fingers wrapped around the grip of a semi-automatic pistol. His knuckles were white. His heart was a cold, hammering engine in his chest. He did not think about the politics. He did not think about the territory war. He thought only of Lila. He thought of her laugh in the kitchen. He thought of the way she looked in that blue satin dress. He thought of the way she felt in his arms, fragile and strong all at once. If they touched her, he would burn the city to ash. The warehouse smelled of brine, rust, and old fish. It was abandoned, located on a rot-infested pier at the edge of the industrial district. Lila was tied to a heavy wooden chair in the center of the vast, empty floor. The hood had been pulled off. She blinked against the harsh glare of a portable work light that was shining directly in her face. She tasted copper. Her lip was cut. The shoulder of her silk blouse was torn, exposing her skin to the damp cold of the warehouse. Her wrists burned where the zip ties dug into her flesh. A man paced in front of her. He was older, with gray stubble and dead eyes. This was the Rossi lieutenant. He leaned in close, smelling of tobacco and peppermint. "Where are the accounts held?" "Lila," he asked casually. "Which banks does Verace use for the offshore funds?" Lila spat blood onto the concrete floor. "I do not know what you're talking about. I am a housekeeper." The lieutenant laughed. "A housekeeper who wears satin gowns to the opera? Do not insult my intelligence. You are close to him. You know where the bodies are buried." "I know nothing," Lila said, lifting her chin. "And even if I did, I would not tell you." The lieutenant sighed, as if disappointed. He reached out and grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. Lila gasped, tears springing to her eyes from the sharp pain, but she did not cry out. "You are loyal," he said. "That is sweet. Stupid, but sweet. Your brother was smarter." Lila froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "My brother," she whispered. "Who do you think told us where to find you?" the lieutenant sneered, enjoying the look of horror dawning on her face. "Little Tyler. He sold you out for a stack of cash and a promise. He thinks he is saving you." "No," Lila breathed. "No, he would not. He led us right to you," the man said, releasing her hair with a shove. "He called us this morning, said you would be at the market." Something inside Lila shattered. The physical pain was nothing compared to the jagged shard of betrayal that pierced her chest. Tyler, her baby brother, the one she had worked double shifts for, the one she had sold her freedom to protect. He had done this. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and angry. They were tears of grief, but also of fury. "If you think that makes me weak," Lila said, her voice trembling but gaining volume, "you are wrong. It just means I have nothing left to lose." The lieutenant raised his hand to strike her again. The metal bay door at the far end of the warehouse exploded inward. It was not a polite entry. A truck rammed through the corrugated metal. Metal screeching against metal like a dying beast. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air, sharp, disciplined bursts. Lila ducked her head as debris rained down, through the smoke and the rain blowing in from the broken door. She saw him. Dante. He moved through the confusion like a phantom. He was not shouting. He was not running wildly. He moved with terrifying, lethal precision. He shot the guard nearest the door twice in the chest without breaking stride. The Rossi lieutenant spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. Dante fired a single shot that took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the concrete, screaming. Dante did not stop for him. He holstered his weapon and sprinted the last 10 yards to the chair. His eyes were wild, scanning her face, her torn shirt, her bleeding lip. "Lila," he choked out. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pulling a knife from his belt with a single, controlled slash. He severed the zip ties on her wrists, then he cut the ropes at her ankles. Lila fell forward, her legs too numb to hold her. Dante caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest so hard it knocked the wind out of her. He buried his face in her neck. "I am here," he whispered into her hair, his voice raw and shaking. "I am here. I have you." The drive back to the mansion was a blur, but Lila remembered the warmth of Dante's jacket wrapped around her shoulders. When they got inside, he did not let the staff take over. He carried her up the grand staircase himself, ignoring the startled looks of the maids. He kicked open the door to her suite and set her gently on the edge of the bed. Lila sat there, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, shivering violently. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her cold and hollow. She stared at her wrists, at the angry red welts where the plastic ties had bitten into her skin. Dante disappeared into the bathroom and returned a moment later with a warm, damp cloth and a first aid kit. He knelt on the floor between her legs. He did not look like a Mafia boss now. He looked like a man who had seen his world almost end. "Give me your hands," he said softly. Lila extended her trembling hands. Dante took them in his own. His touch was impossibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just inflicted on the men in the warehouse. He cleaned the cuts on her wrists, his jaw tight as he looked at the bruises. He touched the cut on her lip with the cloth. Lila hissed in a breath. "I am sorry," Dante whispered, his eyes burning with guilt. "I am so sorry. Lila, I should have protected you better." "It was not your fault," Lila said, her voice hoarse. "It was Tyler." Dante stopped. He looked up at her. "He told them." Lila sobbed, the reality crashing down on her again. "He told them where I would be." Dante's expression hardened for a split second, a flash of murderous intent directed at her brother, but he shoved it aside. He was not the punisher right now. He was the protector. He dropped the cloth and reached up, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the tears tracking through the grime on her cheeks. "Look at me," he commanded gently. "You are safe. You are here. Nothing else matters right now." Lila looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the fear that mirrored her own, and the intense burning focus that was centered entirely on her. She leaned into his touch. She needed to feel him. She needed to know that he was real, that she was alive. "Dante," she whispered. He made a sound in his throat, a low groan of need. He pulled her forward, sliding his arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach as he knelt before her. He held her like she was made of glass, like she might break into a million pieces if he let go. Lila wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. She pulled him closer, needing to erase the space between them. Dante lifted his head. His face was inches from hers. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. He would not cross the line unless she wanted him to. He waited for permission. Lila nodded. "Please." She breathed. Dante surged up. He did not stand. He simply rose enough to capture her lips. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. It was a collision of relief and terror and pent-up need. It was the taste of rain and adrenaline. Lila opened to him instantly, meeting his intensity with her own. She tasted the salt of her tears and the iron of his resolve. Dante's hands slid up her back, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her torn blouse. He groaned against her mouth, a sound of pure worship. He shifted, moving from the floor to the mattress, crowding her back until she was lying against the pillows. He hovered over her, bracing his weight on his forearms so he wouldn't crush her. His eyes scanned her face, cataloging every inch of her, making sure she was real. "You scared me to death," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I am okay," she whispered, her hands roaming over his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart. "I am okay." Dante kissed her again, deeper this time, slower. The panic was fading, replaced by a rising tide of heat, his hand splayed protectively over her spine, holding her flush against him. Lila arched into him, seeking the friction, seeking the oblivion that only he could give her. The lights in the room seemed to dim as the world outside ceased to exist. There was no war, no debt, no betrayal. There was only the two of them, safe in the fortress on the hill, trying to consume each other to prove they were still alive. Dante reached for the lamp on the bedside table and clicked it off. The room plunged into darkness, leaving only the sound of their ragged breathing and the soft rustle of clothes as the door to the hallway clicked shut, locking the rest of the world out. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the guest suite, painting stripes of gold across the carpet. Lila shifted, her body heavy with the remnants of adrenaline and exhaustion. The high thread count sheets felt cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the grit and terror of the warehouse that still lingered in her sensory memory. She turned her head, expecting emptiness. Instead, she saw him. Dante Varese was slumped in a wingback chair pulled close to the side of the bed. He was still wearing the trousers and dress shirt from the night before, though the shirt was unbuttoned at the collar and wrinkled in a way that looked alien on him. His head was tipped back, his breathing slow and deep. Lila watched him for a long moment. In sleep, the severe lines of his face had smoothed out, the ruthlessness that defined him, the sharp calculation in his eyes, the set of his jaw was gone, replaced by a surprising vulnerability. He looked younger. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world and had only just set it down for an hour. She sat up slowly, the movement causing the mattress to shift. Dante's eyes snapped open. There was no groggy transition. He went from asleep to alert in a heartbeat, his hand twitching toward his belt before he registered where he was. He blinked, focusing on her, and the tension drained out of his shoulders. "You are awake," he said, his voice rough with sleep. Lila smiled, a small, tired thing. "You stayed. I told you I would not leave," Dante said. He sat up straighter, wincing slightly as he rolled his neck. A dry crack echoed in the quiet room. "You are going to need a chiropractor," Lila said softly. Dante rubbed the back of his neck, running a hand over the dark shadow of stubble on his jaw. "I am too old to sleep in chairs. Lila, my back is going to punish me for a week." Lila reached out. Her fingers brushed against his cheek, tracing the rough texture of his unshaven skin. It was an intimate gesture, one that belonged to lovers who had known each other for years, not weeks. "You look tired," she whispered. Dante turned his face into her palm, closing his eyes for a second. It was a surrender. For that brief moment, he let her hold the weight of his head. "I am fine," he murmured. "How do you feel?" "Sore," Lila admitted. "But safe." The word hung between them. Safe. It was a fragile thing in this house. Dante pulled back, his expression shifting. The softness that had been in his eyes a moment ago began to harden, replaced by a look of guilt and resignation. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds through a crack in the drapes. "We need to talk," he said. Lila felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. The bubble of morning peace popped instantly. "About what? About how they found you," Dante said without turning around. Lila frowned. The Rossi lieutenant had told her. "It was Tyler. My brother told them." "Yes," Dante said, "but that is not what I need to tell you." He turned to face her. He looked like he was standing before a judge, waiting for a sentence he knew he deserved. I knew about the meeting. Lila stared at him, not comprehending. What meeting? The meeting between Tyler and the Rossi associate? Dante said. His voice was steady, clinical. My surveillance team picked it up 3 days ago. We knew Tyler was in contact with them. We knew they were offering him a deal to wipe his slate clean in exchange for information on you. Lila sat perfectly still. The air in the room seemed to suck out the oxygen. You knew? She whispered. You knew my brother was conspiring with the people who wanted to kill you, and you did not tell me. I thought I could handle it, Dante said, taking a step toward the bed. I thought I could intercept it. I had guys watching Tyler. I wanted to let him play it out so I could identify the Rossi contact and shut it down without you ever having to know he betrayed you. Lila threw the covers off. Scrambling out of bed, she ignored the ache in her ribs and the bruising on her wrists. She stood on the other side of the room, putting the heavy armchair between them. You decided for me, she said, her voice rising, just like Tyler decided for me. Lila, listen. No! Lila shouted, tears stinging her eyes. Tyler sold me out because he thought he was saving me. You kept me in the dark because you thought you were saving me. Does anyone in my life respect me enough to let me save myself? I was trying to protect you from the pain of knowing your brother is a coward, Dante snapped, his own temper flaring as he closed the distance. I did not want you to carry that broken heart if you did not have to. And instead, I ended up tied to a chair in a warehouse, Lila yelled back, because you were playing chess with my life. Dante, you were so busy moving pieces that you forgot I am a person, not a pawn. Dante stopped. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her, disheveled, furious, and terrified, and he knew she was right. His arrogance, his belief that he could control every variable, had almost gotten her killed. You are right, he said quietly. The admission took the wind out of her sails. Lila wrapped her arms around herself, shaking. I cannot do this. Dante, she said, her voice breaking. I cannot live in a world where the people I love view me as collateral damage or leverage. Lila dressed in silence. She borrowed one of the cars, not asking, just taking the keys from the hook in the kitchen and drove into the city. Dante did not stop her. He watched her go from the window of his office, his hands in his pockets, his face a mask of stone. She found Tyler at a coffee shop 3 blocks from their old apartment. It was a dingy place with flickering fluorescent lights and tables that stuck to your elbows. Tyler was sitting in the back corner, hunched over a chipped mug of black coffee. He looked like a ghost. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red. He had clearly not slept since the kidnapping. When he saw Lila walk in, he flinched as if she had struck him. Lie, he choked out. Lila stood over the table. She did not sit down. She looked at her younger brother, the boy she had walked to school, the boy she had bought textbooks for, the boy she had sacrificed her 20s to keep afloat. He stood up, his hands shaking so hard he knocked his spoon onto the floor. Lee, I'm so sorry, he sobbed, reaching for her. I swear to God, I did not know they would hurt you. They said they just wanted leverage. They said, stop. Lila said. She did not yell. Her voice was flat, dead. It stopped Tyler in his tracks. You traded me. Tyler, I was trying to get us out, Tyler cried. People at nearby tables looking over. I thought if I gave them something, they would leave us alone. I thought I was finally fixing it. You were not fixing it, Lila said. You were gambling. Again, you bet my life this time. Tyler, and you lost. Tyler collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I know, I am so sorry. Please, I will make it up to you. No, you will not, Lila said. Tyler looked up, terror in his eyes. What do you mean? Lila took a deep breath. It felt like inhaling glass. I love you, Ty. I have loved you more than I have loved myself for a long time. But I cannot keep drowning for you. I cannot keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm. Lee, please, I am done. Tyler, she said, tears finally spilling over her lashes. I am not paying your debts anymore. I am not cleaning up your messes. You are on your own. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope of cash, her tips from the hotel she had saved before moving into the mansion. She placed it on the table. This is for a bus ticket, she said. Go to Nevada. Go to Arizona. Go somewhere and start over. But do not call me until you are the man I know you can be." Lila turned around and walked out of the coffee shop. She heard Tyler call her name, a desperate, broken sound, but she did not look back. She got into the car, gripped the steering wheel, and screamed until her throat was raw. When she returned to the mansion, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the driveway. She found Dante by the pool. He was not swimming. He was sitting on the edge of a lounge chair, staring into the illuminated water, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. He stood up when he saw her. He looked at her red eyes and the set of her jaw, and he knew. "You saw him?" Dante asked. "I said goodbye to him," Lila said. She walked over to the edge of the pool, standing near the spot where they had first met in the dark. She looked at Dante. He looked powerful, beautiful, and incredibly lonely. "I have to leave, Dante," she said. Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He did not argue. He did not try to convince her to stay. "I know," he said. Lila felt a fresh wave of tears rise. "I cannot live like this. Caught between fear of your enemies and disappointment in the people I love. I'm always looking over my shoulder. I'm always waiting for the next shoe to drop." She took a step closer to him. "And the worst part is, I do not want to leave." Dante looked at her sharply. "I have fallen for you," Lila whispered. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "More than I intended. More than is smart. And that terrifies me more than the Rossis do, because if I stay, I will lose myself completely in your world." Dante looked as if she had shot him. The pain in his eyes was raw and unguarded. He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. He did not touch her. "I will consider Tyler's debt paid," he said. His voice was low. "Rough gravel. It is wiped. Zero balance." Lila blinked. "Dante. And I will arrange protection," he continued, speaking over her. "I have a safe house in Seattle, or I can set you up in Chicago. New identity if you want it, or just money to start over." "You are sending me away?" Lila asked. "I am giving you an exit," Dante corrected. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "You are right. Lila, I am poison." "No," Lila said instinctively. "I am," he insisted, his voice rising in intensity. "Look at what happened to you. You have been here less than a month, and you have been threatened, kidnapped, and beaten. My life destroys everything it touches. I built this empire on violence, and violence is the only currency I have." He gestured around them at the mansion. "The high walls, the security cameras. This is not a home. Lila, it is a fortress, and it is a cage. You do not belong in a cage." Lila grabbed the lapels of his shirt. She yanked him toward her, anger flashing in her eyes. "Stop deciding for me," she cried. "You are not just poison. Dante, you are the man who saved me. You are the man who held me when I was falling apart. You listened to me when nobody else did. You see me." She shook him slightly. "Do not tell me who you are. I know who you are. You're a good man doing bad things." Dante's control snapped. He grabbed her face between his palms, his fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a bruising, desperate collision of mouths. It was a goodbye. It was an apology. It was a plea. Lila made a sound in her throat and fisted her hands in his collar, pulling him closer, trying to merge her body with his. They stood by the glowing pool, wrapped in each other, breathing each other's air. For a moment, Lila thought he might ask her to stay. She thought he might fight for this, for them. Dante pulled back. His chest was heaving, his breath hot on her face, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he whispered. The words were a confession torn from his chest. Lila sobbed, a dry, hitching sound. "Then let me stay." "No," Dante said. He stepped back, his hands falling from her face. He clenched his fists at his sides to keep from reaching for her again. "I love you enough to let you go," he said. "I will not drag you down with me. The storm is coming. Lila, the Rossis are not done. The feds are not done. If you stay, you will drown." He looked at her one last time, memorizing her face. "Go, Lila, before I change my mind." Lila moved out the next morning. She did not take the money Dante offered. She took only her clothes and the few personal items she had brought with her. She found a modest apartment on the other side of San Aurelio, far from the hills, far from the ocean view. It was quiet. She got a job as a receptionist at a small, struggling fashion studio downtown. The work was easy. The people were nice. Nobody had guns. Nobody threatened to burn down the building. But the silence in her apartment was deafening. Every time she made coffee, she remembered Dante's hands covering hers on the grinder. Every time she saw a black sedan, her heart jumped. Every time she swam at the local community center, she felt the ghost of the water in the mansion pool. She missed him. It was a physical ache, a phantom limb pain that woke her up in the middle of the night. She had her safety. She had her freedom. But the colors of the world seemed to have been dialed down to gray. Up in the hills, Dante Varese was a man dismantling his own life. He worked with a cold, frantic energy. He began liquidating assets, selling off shipping containers, closing down construction fronts, moving money into clean accounts that could not be touched by the RICO Act. His captains were confused. They whispered that the boss was losing his nerve. They whispered that the war with the Rossis had spooked him. Dante did not care what they thought. He had a plan. He was going to cut the head off the Rossi snake, and then he was going to vanish. He was going to leave the life. He spent his nights alone in the office, staring at the surveillance feeds of the empty pool. He slept in the chair in the guest suite, torturing himself with the scent of her that still lingered on the pillows. But the Rossi family was not stupid. They had eyes everywhere. In a back room of a strip club in the red light district, the Rossi boss, an obese man named Sal, listened to a report from one of his spies. Varese is selling, the spy said. He's liquidating. He's planning to run. Sal smiled, revealing gold-capped teeth. He's weak. The girl broke him. He leaned back, lighting a cigar. If he's running, he's distracted, Sal said. He's looking at the door, not at us. This is the time to strike. We hit the mansion? The spy asked. No, Sal said. We tried that. He's too dug in. We hit him where he is soft. He picked up a photograph from the table. It was a grainy, long-lens shot of Lila Hart walking out of a fashion studio downtown. He loves her, Sal said, blowing smoke into the air. And a man in love makes mistakes. We take the girl again, and this time, we do not ask for bank accounts. This time, we tell him to come and get her, and when he does, we end the Varese line for good. Lila was closing up the studio on a Thursday evening. The designer had left early, leaving Lila to lock the back door and turn off the lights. She hummed to herself as she straightened a mannequin, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. She checked her watch. 7 o'clock. She would go home, make a salad, and watch bad reality TV until she fell asleep. She walked to the back door, keys in hand. She paused. Through the glass pane of the door, she saw a car idling in the alleyway. It was a black sedan. The engine was running, a low, menacing rumble. Lila felt a prickle of instinct on the back of her neck. It was the same feeling she had at the pool that first night. The feeling of being watched. She backed away from the door. The car door opened. Lila turned and ran toward the front of the store, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed the only number that mattered. But before she could hit send, the front glass of the shop shattered inward. The bell above the door of the fashion studio chimed softly as the last customer left, leaving Lila Hart alone in the sudden silence of the shop. It was 7 in the evening. The studio, a small boutique tucked away in the arts district of San Aurelio, smelled of fabric sizing and floor polish. It was a world away from the marble halls and ozone-scented air of the Varese mansion. And Lila told herself that this was what she wanted: peace, quiet, safety. She moved through the space, picking up discarded fabric swatches, swaths of emerald silk and charcoal wool, and returning them to their color-coded bins. She straightened the scarf on a mannequin, her fingers lingering on the material. She was safe here. She had her own apartment. She had a job where the biggest crisis was a shortage of zippers. But as she walked toward the back of the shop to lock up, a shadow stretched across the floorboards. Lila froze. Through the front display window, beyond the headless mannequins, a car was idling at the curb. It was a black sedan, nondescript and heavy, its windows tinted to an impenetrable obsidian. It had been there when the last customer walked out. It was still there now. The engine rumbled. A low, predatory vibration that Lila felt in the soles of her feet. Her stomach knotted. She knew that stillness. She had seen it in the men who guarded Dante's gates. She had felt it the day she was taken from the parking structure. It was the stillness of a hunter waiting for the wind to shift. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. Lila abandoned the front of the store, turning on her heel to rush toward the back exit. Her hands fumbled for her keys, the metal biting into her palm, just as her fingers touched the deadbolt of the rear door. The wood splintered inward with a deafening crash. Lila screamed, stumbling back as the door flew open, kicking up dust and debris. 2 men filled the frame. They were not the polished professionals Dante employed. These men were rougher, wearing leather jackets and expressions of grim purpose. Rossi men. She grabbed a heavy pair of fabric shears from the cutting table, brandishing them like a knife. "Stay back!" The first man didn't even pause. He stepped forward, knocking the shears from her hand with a brutal swipe of his arm, before Lila could draw a breath to scream again. A heavy hand clamped over her mouth, and an arm banded around her waist. Lifting her off her feet, she kicked and thrashed, her heels connecting with shins, her nails digging into leather. But it was like fighting a tide. They dragged her out the back door, into the alleyway where the black sedan was now waiting, the rear door already open. They shoved her into the back seat. The door slammed shut, engaging the child locks with a hollow click. The car peeled out of the alley, tires screeching against the asphalt. Lila scrambled upright, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked out the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of neon. They were not heading toward the docks. They were not heading to a warehouse. They were climbing. The car banked hard, taking the winding switchbacks that led up to the high hills. Lila watched the ocean recede below them, the moonlight glittering on the water. They were heading back to the one place she had sworn to leave. They were taking her back to Dante. The gates of the Verace mansion had been rammed open. The heavy iron was twisted, hanging off its hinges. The sedan roared up the driveway, past the ruined entrance, and screeched to a halt in the courtyard. "Get her out!" the driver barked. Lila was hauled from the car. The air up here was thinner, sharper. It smelled of jasmine and imminent violence. The Rossi men did not take her inside the house. They dragged her around the side, through the garden gate, toward the terrace. The pool area was bathed in the eerie glow of the underwater lights. The turquoise water rippled gently, undisturbed, a stark contrast to the chaos descending upon it. The lead Rossi enforcer, a man with a scar cutting through his eyebrow, shoved Lila forward. She stumbled, catching herself on a lounge chair. "Verace!" the man roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the mansion. "Come out, you coward!" He grabbed Lila by the arm, jerking her upright and pressing the barrel of a gun to her temple. "We have your favorite girl, Dante. Come out and face us, or we throw her in the deep end." The glass doors of the terrace shattered outward. It was not an explosion, but a tactical breach. The glass rained down like diamonds as Dante Verace stepped through the ruin of his own home. He was not wearing a suit tonight. He wore tactical black, a Kevlar vest strapped tight over his chest, his face a mask of cold, focused fury. In his right hand he held a heavy pistol, leveled steadily at the man holding Lila. Flanking him were Cal and 3 other Verace security specialists, their weapons drawn, moving with the synchronized precision of a wolf pack. "Let her go," Dante said. His voice was not a shout. It was a quiet, terrifying command that cut through the night air. The Rossi man laughed, though it sounded nervous. He tightened his grip on Lila, digging the gun into her skin. "Drop the weapon, Verace, or she dies wet and screaming." Dante's eyes locked onto Lila's, across the 20 feet of stone and water that separated them. A silent conversation passed between them. He saw the terror in her wide eyes, but he also saw her resolve, and she saw the promise in his gaze, a vow that he would burn the world down before he let them hurt her again. "I am not dropping anything," Dante said softly. The air trembled with the tension of the standoff. A moth fluttered near one of the security lights, its wings the only thing moving in the frozen tableau. Then, Cal shifted his aim. The first shot cracked like a whip. It hit the Rossi man in the shoulder, spinning him around. His grip on Lila loosened for a fraction of a second. "Drop!" Dante shouted. Lila threw herself to the ground, scrambling behind a heavy teak lounge chair just as the air erupted into chaos. Gunfire tore through the silence. It was deafening, a cacophony of pops and booms that bounced off the water and the walls. Bullets ripped through the cushions of the chair Lila was hiding behind, sending plumes of white stuffing into the air like snow. She curled into a ball, covering her head with her arms, the sharp smell of chlorine and burning gunpowder filling her nose. Through the gaps in the furniture, she saw Dante moving. He was advancing, firing with controlled bursts, closing the distance between the house and the pool. He was a force of nature, ignoring the cover, his only objective to get to her. "Dante!" she screamed as she saw him stumble. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, tearing through the tactical vest. Blood bloomed dark against the black fabric. He grunted, his stride faltering, but he refused to fall. He steadied himself, raised his weapon and fired again, dropping a Rossi attacker who had been flanking him. But in the confusion, one of the Rossi men, the driver from the sedan, had circled around the edge of the pool. Lila gasped as a hand grabbed the back of her blouse, hauling her up from behind her cover. "I got her," the man shouted. Dragging her backward, Lila struggled, kicking out, but he was strong. He pinned her arms to her sides, pressing a gun into her ribs. They were standing precariously close to the pool's edge, the water lapping just inches from their heels. "Don't move! Faraz!" the man screamed at Dante, who was 10 feet away, his gun raised but unable to fire without hitting Lila. Dante froze. Blood was dripping from his arm, pooling on the stone tiles. His chest heaved, his eyes wild with fear for her. "Back off!" the attacker yelled, dragging Lila another step back. Her heels slipped on the wet coping. She teetered, staring down into the illuminated blue water. The light reflected off the surface, dancing in erratic patterns. Suddenly, a memory flashed through Lila's mind with crystal clarity. The first night, the silence, the steam rising from the water, Dante's voice, low and rough, cutting through the dark. "You shouldn't swim alone." The fear in her chest crystallized into something else. Adrenaline, rage. She was done being the leverage. She was done being the victim. Lila stopped struggling. She let her body go limp for a split second, tricking the attacker into relaxing his grip. Then, she moved. With a sharp exhale, she twisted her body violently to the left. She drove her elbow backward with every ounce of strength she possessed, aiming for the soft space between the man's ribs. The impact was solid. The man grunted, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. His grip shattered. Lila didn't stop. She planted her feet and shoved him hard, putting all her weight into the push. The attacker, already off balance on the slick tiles, flailed, his arms windmilled, but there was nothing to grab. He tipped backward, his eyes widening in shock. He hit the water with a massive splash. The gun flew from his hand, skittering across the wet tiles and sliding under a chair. Lila scrambled away from the edge, slipping on the splashed water, her knees hitting the stone hard. "Get down!" Dante roared. He lunged forward, diving not for the attacker, but for her. He covered her body with his own, shielding her with his back as the remaining Rossi men fired in desperation. Lila felt the heavy weight of him pressing her into the cold stone. She felt the heat of his body, the rapid thunder of his heart against her spine. He was a human wall, taking the danger meant for her. Sirens began to wail in the distance, a rising chorus of red and blue that signaled the end. Someone in the neighborhood had called the police. The Rossi men, hearing the sirens, broke and ran, hopping the garden walls and vanishing into the dark scrub of the hills. The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the two people lying on the pool deck. Dante rolled off her, groaning as his injured shoulder hit the ground. He sat up, leaning heavily against the base of a lounge chair. Lila scrambled to her knees. She reached for him, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Dante!" she sobbed. She pressed her hands over the wound on his shoulder. The blood was warm and sticky, seeping through her fingers. Her tears fell, mixing with the pool water and the blood on his skin. "I am okay," Dante rasped, reaching up to touch her face with his good hand. He smeared a streak of blood on her cheek, but neither of them cared. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "No," Lila cried, shaking her head. "I am fine. You are bleeding. It is just a graze," he said, though his face was pale. Lila gripped his shirt, pulling him slightly toward her. "You're not allowed to leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me? Dante Varese, you're not allowed to die." Dante looked at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, naked honesty. He smiled, a weak but genuine expression. "I am not going anywhere. Lila, not without you." The interrogation room at the federal building was gray, sterile, and cold. It smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Dante sat on one side of the metal table. His shoulder was bandaged under a fresh shirt. His lawyer sat beside him, looking nervous, but Dante looked calm. He looked like a man playing his final hand. Agent Monroe sat opposite him, a file open on the table. "This is a lot to ask. Varese," Monroe said, tapping a pen on the metal surface. "Total immunity?" "Not immunity," Dante corrected. "A reduced sentence. Time served. And protection." He leaned forward. "I am giving you the Rossies, Monroe. I am giving you the shipping routes, the accounts, the names of the politicians on their payroll. I am handing you the biggest organized crime bust in San Aurelio's history on a silver platter." "And in exchange?" Monroe asked. "I get out," Dante said. "I dissolve the Varese operations. Legit businesses only, and—" He glanced toward the one-way mirror. He knew who was sitting on the other side, waiting in the hallway. "And Lila Hart and her brother get federal protection. New identities if they want them. But mostly, they get to be left alone." Monroe followed his gaze to the mirror. He had seen Lila in the waiting area. She had been there for 6 hours. She had refused coffee, refused food, refused to leave until she saw Dante walk out. Monroe sighed. He closed the file. "We can structure a deal," Monroe said, "but the life is over. Dante, you step one toe out of line and the deal evaporates." Dante leaned back in his chair. He felt a weight lift off his chest, a weight he had been carrying since he was 18 years old. "The life is over." He agreed. "I have something better to do." 6 months later, the house was small. It sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, but it was hundreds of miles north of San Aurelio, in a town where the fog rolled in thick and the tourists were few. It had a small garden, a squeaky front gate, and no security cameras. The kitchen was filled with the smell of roasted garlic and the scratch of charcoal on paper. Lila sat at the wooden table, surrounded by sketches. She was working as an assistant for a local designer, and tonight she was drafting ideas for a fall collection. She wore a paint-stained t-shirt and her hair was messy, pulled up in a clip. The front door opened. Dante walked in. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, clothes that would have looked ridiculous on the Dante Varese of 6 months ago, but fit this new man perfectly. He looked tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from honest work. He walked over to the table and kissed the top of her head. "How is the genius at work?" he asked. Lila smiled, leaning back against him. "The genius is hungry. How was the firm?" "Busy," Dante said, stealing a piece of bread from her plate. "The security consultancy is picking up. We got a contract with the local hospital today." Lila watched him. His world was smaller now. He wasn't a king anymore. He was just a man. And she had never loved him more. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and burnt orange. They stepped out into the backyard. It was modest, just a patch of grass and a small, kidney-shaped pool that had come with the house. It wasn't heated, and it didn't have underwater lights, but the water was clear. Lila stood by the edge. She was wrapped in a simple white satin robe. She dipped her toe in. "It is cold," she warned. Dante stood beside her, looking at the water. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. He looked at her. "You shouldn't swim alone," he said softly. Lila laughed. The sound was bright and free, carrying on the ocean breeze. She looked at him, her eyes dancing with mischief and memory. "I know," she said. She grinned, and then, with a deliberate shrug of her shoulders, she let the satin robe slide off. It pooled at her feet on the grass, leaving her in a simple navy swimsuit. She stepped into the shallow end, shivering slightly as the cool water embraced her and extended a hand toward him. Dante didn't hesitate. He stripped off his shirt, tossing it onto the lawn. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, strong, warm, and safe. He stepped into the water, joining her. The water closed around them, washing away the heat of the day. They didn't swim laps. They didn't worry about lines of sight or snipers in the hills. They drifted together to the center of the small pool. Dante wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Lila wrapped her legs around his, her arms looping around his neck. They floated there in the quiet twilight, bobbing gently. Their faces were inches apart, relaxed, unguarded, full of a love they had bled for, fought for, and finally earned. "I got you," Dante whispered against her lips. "I know," Lila whispered back. As they held each other in the darkening water, the camera of the mind pulled back. It rose above the small backyard, above the modest house, above the town. It showed two people, no longer alone by the pool, but finally safe, together, and ready to build a life that belonged only to them. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lila and Dante as much as I enjoyed writing it. It has been a pleasure to craft this tale of danger, redemption, and love for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in English in the comments section. Your feedback inspires the next story. Until next time.